Hello, everybody. Welcome to Window Watch. I don't know about you, Pad. I get the sinking feeling that this is going to be a quiet one. I'm not sure about you. I don't. There's too much going on. Connor Southwell joined by Paddy, Davitt. We're going to dissect all of the latest Norwich City transfer news and speculation. Thank you all very much for joining us. I can already see the comments flooding in, which is brilliant. Get your questions, your comments, your concerns, maybe even currently. I'm seeing quite a lot of that on social media.
Concerns, Connor? Concerns?
I'm seeing a few people a little bit concerned about maybe what they're doing. So if anyone has any of those, send them in and we'll try and relax you a little bit. Of course, Norwich City play their final pre-season friendly tomorrow against Newcastle, don't they? We'll be at St James's Park for all the updates and news and views. Pad, it's been a quiet one. I think the last 24 hours have been especially quiet. I'm not sure too much is going on. Let's start with Christos Tzolis and where Norwich City are with that deal. We obviously had the story yesterday that things are moving in the right direction, and it seems like this is one that is continuing to edge closer.
Yeah, I think closer being the operative word. Yeah, obviously, not talking about him per se, but all of these deals, certainly when you get into Premier League grade upgrades, it's not a very simple process. There are a lot of parties, constituent elements that all have to be on board with this. You're dealing obviously now with the added complexities with the whole Brexit dimension, with the rules and regs and everything that goes through that in terms of the work permit and the red tape, if you want to give it that generic term. And these deals painstakingly get put together. I mean, I'll just draw a parallel, albeit nowhere near the same sort of figures, but that Villa, Man City, Grealish kind of soap opera, that's been going for months and months and months, and it's only now reached the conclusion to the point where all the elements were in place, the deal gets put together, signed off, and away you go. Jack Grealish is £100 million footballer. So where we are with Norwich and Tzolis is, I think an agreement is there verbally with all the parties, the two clubs, the player, his representatives. I don't think there's too much work to be done on that, but it's just now the I's and the T's and getting it down from verbal to actually on a contract, everything signed and sealed. And then Christos Tzolis should be a Norwich player. Probably won't be before the weekend, I think now. I saw one or two reports about he could be heading to England this weekend to finalise it. That's possibly going to be the case. But in terms of bang club announcement, this is now our 7th senior signing. I think we're probably looking into next week now, and that would also apply, and we'll get into him in a bit more depth, but Josh Sargent as well. I'm pretty confident there won't be any stand by your beds announcements today, so both of those are progressing in the right direction, but as we sit here right now, be a bit premature to say both of those are going to be Norwich City players, but I think the growing optimism inside the club is that is going to be the case. But as I say, these things, it's always the last mile or whatever that takes the longest, or whatever that saying is. I've just made that up. I'm sure there's some sort of saying along those lines. The final yards are the hardest or whatever, but that probably does apply in these situations, because ultimately for Norwich, you're dealing, if not over club record territory, very close to, and those sums underline why for Norwich everything has to be right. So looking good, but not there yet.
Yeah, it's that whole thing, isn't it? It's not done until everything's done. And as we kind of reported, moving closer, edging closer, pretty close, but not quite 100% signed, sealed and delivered yet. Of course, we hope that is going to be the case in the next few days, and everything points into that direction. Just a bit more on Tzolis. We've had a lot of stuff out of the Greek end. I think that's fair to say.
Aren't you now a radio star in Greece, Connor? You were just telling me before we went live. Tell the audience.
Slightly,
it's a string to your bow.
It's a slightly surreal experience whenever you're doing kind of foreign radio, because they ask you the question in English. I was asked to speak slower because I speak too quickly.
Okay.
That you then deliver your answer in English, and then the presenter then goes and translates that in Greek, or is saying whatever they want to say about me in Greek that I'd never understand. So that's kind of it. And there seems like there's a lot of Greek media outlets that have kind of been on this and picked this up and had various different lines of it. So it is very interesting to see how it's been reported over there compared to maybe how it's been reported over here, and the difference in terms of transfer sort of deals in the media. It's all very interesting. But we digress. In terms of Tzolis and that kind of package, which we understand to be around 12 million euros, which equates to what, about 10.5 million, sort of in English pounds. That would be a club record deal. He's 19 years old. Is that a lot of expectation to put on a 19-year-old sort of winger? Is that a lot of pressure for him coming, if it does get sort of rubber stamped and he is holding a Norwich shirt in the next few days? Is that a lot of pressure for him to have on his shoulders, particularly given Emi Buendia's already departed this summer?
Well, it is, but lesser or lessened, sorry, by the fact they've done a similar deal for Rashica, who's a bit older, a bit more experienced, a few more games under his belt, and if the cards fall right, Sargent comes in, that'll be around about the same figures, give or take. So, if he was their standout signing this summer, we're still talking in hypothetical terms, then yeah, I think there would be a huge amount of expectation on him. But the fact that they're trying to stitch together a squad with 2 or 3 maybe by the end of the window, that scale of deal, no. And particularly, like I say, because they've already brought in Rashica, who may be initially the go-to one because he's been around the block a little bit longer. Ultimately, if they, and we know they've been after this player they've been tracking him for 12 months, so they will have really drilled down into everything about him. I remember Ben Gibson, I think, talking about the levels of research that went in terms not just the footballing ability of these players, but the character, the personality. With that young man, it's going to help hugely. I think that a former club mate and international mate, Dimitris Giannoulis, is already here. That's got to help the adaptation process. But I can almost hear Farke now talking in terms of, if it goes through successfully, don't put too much pressure on him. He's very young. He's still got to find his feet in England and Premier League football. But the potential is there, and they will work to try and extract that from him. But the fact that they're willing to commit this sort of amount for that age of player, they obviously feel that there's a talent there who, in the right environment, bringing him in for 9-10 million, if he hits the ground in the next sort of 2-3 seasons at Norwich and delivers what they expect he's going to deliver, then that's probably looking quite cheap. So, again, you have to back their judgment in terms of the astuteness they go about things in the market, and if this guy turns into another one who looks like they've got him a little bit on the cheap at the right time, a little bit like Giannoulis, really. They stepped in there at what was a very good time in terms of a guy who'd been linked to maybe more established clubs around Europe, but for whatever reason it hadn't happened. This guy reportedly has popped up on sort of Manchester United, Borussia Dortmund scouting radars. Well, if that is true, if there's any grain of truth in that, then that tells you the calibre of talent that potentially is going to be walking through the door and holding up a yellow shirt in not too long a time from now. So, I don't know. You'd like to think, maybe we'll get a flavour of the comments now coming through. You'd like to think if he comes through the door at that age, even with that price tag, there'll be plenty of leeway in terms of allowing him to sort of, find his feet and then kick on from there. But anybody looking at the numbers he produced in Greek football last season at such a tender age, clearly that is a guy who has some precocious ability, and if anybody can get that out of him, I'm sure it would be a coach like Daniel Farke.
Yeah, you mentioned Giannoulis there. I think back to that kind of bedding in period he had at Norwich. There were 3 or 4 games where he just tried to sort of find his feet a little bit on what were not great pitches, some of them against some fairly robust opposition, is what Neil Warnock's side and Millwall away were his first 2 games. Welcome to English football. So, yeah, a 19-year-old lad stepping into the Premier League is definitely going to take a little bit of time. And I suppose given Norwich's fixture list, and there's been quite a bit of chatter about this week, does that kind of help them in terms of what they're trying to do and leave stuff a little bit later in the window? Because the first, 4 or 5 fixtures are all against fairly tough opposition. You look at the start, Liverpool at home, Manchester City away. I doubt there'll be anyone who expects them to get anything out of those 2 games. Does that kind of ease the pressure and allow them to sort of bed those players in with a little less expectation because of the fixture list, I suppose, and how that's kind of formed?
Yeah, you'd like to think so. I mean, my mind goes back to the other night after Gillingham in the context of, all these COVID-related absences that they've had. Daniel pegged it at 11 players have either had the virus or had to self-isolate as a precaution. And as a result of that very disruptive episode in pre-season, he's already predicting I think his phrase was, it's going to be a bumpy start. So I think he's trying to get the messaging out there that that's before you overlay those rather daunting looking fixtures in August that you alluded to there, Connor. It's going to be a very challenging start, full stop. And if that is the case, then yeah, I think. But I think it's for me personally. No, I think any new signing coming in at this stage, whoever they were likely to be playing in August, I think there'd be a leeway there because Tzolis is a good example. He's a far more established player. Yet he clearly did struggle to adapt to, and albeit that was Championship football, not Premier League football. But Daniel used to talk about Mario Vrancic, Marco Stiepermann. They needed almost the first season in English football, and they were vastly more experienced than a Rashica, than a Tzolis, maybe even a Sargent. So, but of course, set against that is they don't really have a huge amount of time to sort of get with it, as it were, because ultimately, if you're going to be on the back foot come September in terms of points on the board, you're already playing catch up, and the games before you know it, you sort of turn in for home, and Christmas is behind you. So, it's a balancing act, but mixed in with these new lads coming in is that experienced core still, and I'm sure the ones like Krul, Hanley, Gibson, for example, Pookie, throw him in there, they will have quite a role to play, I think, in terms of smoothing that adaptation process. But yeah, the reality is, you're coming in for the sums they're coming in. There will be an expectation, even with their relative youth, that they will need to deliver and deliver quickly.
Absolutely. Just to answer Cameron's question about it being a done deal, hopefully he's already got the answer in kind of the first 12 minutes, but not yet, but edging closer, Cameron. Not quite done. Let's move on to Josh Sargent then. This is a name that emerged earlier on in the summer, didn't it? I think it was a reported €10 million bid that Norwich saw rejected, I think, at that stage. It does seem to have progressed. Obviously, we had the tweet from CBS reporter Roger Gonzalez, I think, hopefully I've named him correctly, who stated that they were in advanced talks. And from what we can gather, those reports seem to be correct, don't they? It seems like Josh Sargent, again, not done, not in the building as we've said, but looks to be another one that they're working hard to get into the building within the next few days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm led to believe as recent as earlier today that Sargent might be done before Tzolis, so that has really accelerated, because I think there was a few quotes attributed to sort of Werder Bremen's technical director, sporting director, whatever, yesterday, as recent as yesterday, saying that there was nothing firm on. Now I don't know the context of that, but clearly that things have been moving very, very rapidly. If Norwich are hopeful that's one that might get done before Tzolis is done, and but I would add the caveat that there is a little expectation he might still be involved with Werder tomorrow. I think they've got a German Cup tie against Osnabrück, who I think obviously a lower level team, but I think he's still going to be part of their plans this weekend, and then that's one that could, if all the cards fall correctly, accelerate into next week. But it might be in the end of next week before that is actually a done deal. We were talking earlier, I think Southampton have been linked with him this morning as well. That might just be wishful thinking, given they've got a large amount of cash burning the back pocket, given Danny Ings has moved on and they need strikers. They've been linked to Adam Armstrong as well, haven't they? And I saw reports of an inquiry for Tammy Abraham, ultimately, and I think Leverkusen were linked to this guy back in Germany as well over the summer. For context, Werder have been relegated. Obviously, Norwich did the Rashica deal with them, so a little bit like with Pauk and Tzolis, there are very good communication channels already open with that German club. But it looks like that has accelerated in the last 24 hours. He is definitely one they want to do, and that might possibly be done before Tzolis. But as I say, just to reiterate, again, we're not at the, at some point today, we're going to see pictures of him holding up a Norwich shirt. It's a little bit further away from that, and could still be involved with Werder tomorrow, which in itself tells you we're not at the 11th hour if he's still in Germany and still part of Werder's squad for their cup tie tomorrow. So, But yeah, looking positive, and it's an interesting one because let's be honest. The first thing I ever do when they get linked to these type of players is you sort of jump on these sites and look at their stats, particularly if they're a striker. And I think he scored 5 goals 2 seasons ago and 4 last season, albeit in a team who were getting relegated. So you have to put the context around that, but not exactly prolific. But he's only 21, and by all accounts, the type of player he is a very hardworking, harassing defenders type of player who maybe needs to work a little bit on his finishing prowess. But a lot of this is in the context of easing the burden a little bit on Teemu Pukki, both the workload and the goal scoring burden. And if he's 21, he's again one who they would look to hopefully have a short term impact, but maybe looking a little bit mid to longer term, because the GOAT isn't going to go on forever, let's be honest. So, that, and also I believe, I think he scored 2 goals already for Werder in their last Bundesliga 2 match, but he's playing more on the wider role. He's not your out and out man down the middle. And of course, the way Norwich are going to play, if Teemu's fit, Teemu will start certainly at the beginning of the Premier League season. But if you've got a guy who could operate slightly in a wider area, who has that goal threat, but is going to, add to the work they need to do without the ball, then, it ticks a lot of boxes. So maybe probably wrong to focus solely on his goal output so far. He's played 16 times for the US. I think he's got 5 goals at international level. So there's a talent there. And if clubs like Leverkusen were looking at him, then that tells me, it could be another astute bit of business. I mean, the figures I'm seeing are sort of around about the 8 to 10 million mark. So again, you can see the pattern emerging with Rashica, with Aya when they were linked to him. Norwich are obviously bracketing around that sort of 8 to 12 million mark. And if that's the case, particularly for strikers who we know can cost considerably more than that, he clearly is one that ticks a lot of boxes for them. So, yeah, looking positive. But again, just to reiterate, not a done deal yet.
Absolutely. Just to pick up on something you said there in terms of the goal record, and it's already been mentioned. Jam Kerr on YouTube has said, can't say I'm thrilled with the prospect of Sargent signing. We should be after someone as good as, if not better than Pukki. There's been some other comments about his goal record as well, which I'll try and grab up. Keith Shaw says, boys, do you think Sargent is up to the task? Not a great record. There is a lot of focus on his goals. I was reading up on him last night, actually, and it was a piece, I think, on the official Bundesliga website, and it kind of compared his style to Roberto Firmino, of course, is at Liverpool. Very different strikers, but there was a quote from Jurgen Klopp on Firmino where he said he doesn't just judge him in terms of goals or output. It's actually kind of the stuff that doesn't get measured by the statistics, the way he connects the attack, his work off the ball. I've seen a lot of people say, I think Dan O'Hagan, who we had on here before, speaking about Milo Rashica, and hopefully we'll get Dan on again to speak about Josh Sargent, should that one get across the line, mentioned his work off the ball and stuff like that, which, if you think about how Norwich are maybe going to play in the Premier League, given that they are not going to have a lot of possession in some games, maybe it's a bit more pragmatic to have a striker like that, someone who does work hard and someone who is good against the ball and maybe connects in a way more than scoring goals. And maybe that's kind of the thinking. But it is interesting that he has played on the wing as well for Werder Bremen so far. I mean, we've kind of, I think since the start of the summer, said it would be a winger striker that Norwich would try and get. Obviously, Tzolis is separate to that. It's interesting that they've gone for someone 21. Again, you mentioned strikers being costly. He isn't proven, and the fact is, if they've got someone with a brilliant goal scoring record, then they'd be looking at 30 million, wouldn't they? Not, or 20 million, as is the case with Adam Armstrong, as opposed to this lad. So there is going to be a little bit of risk in whoever they bring in this position, because you have to pay premium for strikers. But with Daniel Farke, a coach who has improved players, who has developed young talent, you would imagine that they back him to get the best out of this guy, someone who has played a lot for America. Yeah,
I mean, it fits the profile. And what I'd say is, if you were to bring in a proven, which basically you're saying an experienced striker, you're spending, money that Norwich simply don't have in terms of the levels that they can go to. And what we're saying there, because he's not going to suddenly start playing 2 strikers. If Teemu Pukki is fit, he will play. And that's the here and that's the now. And that's how much emphasis and importance Daniel Farke places on that man. So to bring somebody in who's better than him, but also is going to cost that amount of money, say better than him, but in the eyes of others would be better than him, I'm not sure whether that's going to be the best use of their resource. And they still want to do other areas of the squad. We're talking a lot about the top end of the pitch this afternoon, but they want to do another midfielder. They want to do a left back and maybe still a centre back. And okay, they've got a loan option for one of those positions, but it's ever present. Anything they're trying to do recruitment wise in this window is impacted by the amount of resource they've got available. And of course, spinning out of that would be what would be happening hypothetically if they were to lose a Cantwell or an Aarons. But right here, right now, those two are on board and they're part of it. So that's not a focus of the resource that they have available to go into the market. So even if they wanted, which I don't think they do necessarily, because as I say, Daniel is so wedded to playing Timu that even if they wanted to bring in that, they haven't got the funds to do it. So it's a bit of a redundant argument ultimately. And if that is the context, then, but you still want to maybe ease a little bit of the burden on that guy, then it makes perfect sense to bring in an unproven, certainly not a prolific goal scorer, but one who they think has the raw material that they could work with and improve, and at his age, get better. And then if he gets better and he adds that goal element, to the other parts of his game which we're discussing, then again it looks very good business. And that's really what they're trying to do. Can they bar Lees Malou? I would argue, can they buy ready-made? Can they buy off the shelf? And the honest answer is they probably can't. There's always going to be an element of gamble to any of the recruitment that they make, and that element of gamble is the unproven nature of some of these. Even Gilmour, as good as he's looked in pre-season, he's not a huge amount of games in the Premier League. So there was and is an element of risk that move comes off, and that's just a loan move. So exponentially, if you're spending millions and millions and millions, you're trying to lessen the gamble element, and we'll see. I mean, ultimately, I've seen some. Well, actually, it was across the road. Actually, I seen Paul Cook. We won't dwell on Ipswich Town for too long, but they've done a lot of business, and I think he's already saying that there's a proportion of those deals they won't work because that's the nature of transfer business. Some of those that they brought in are not going to be the fit, even though they've done their diligence and they think they will be good signings. The nature of it, and we've seen that previously in windows past with Norwich. We all know the ones that were massive misfits, if you want to use that phrase. But all of those, when they were being brought through the door, Webber and his recruitment team and Farker, they felt they were going to be a good fit. So it's not an exact science, and I'm sure if all of these deals come off and they get the other 2 or 3 positions they want, we might be looking back January and 1 or 2 of these won't have worked out, and that's just the nature of it, isn't it? So, you're rolling the dice ultimately. If you're Norwich trying to bridge the massive gulf to stay in the Premier League, you've got to take a few gambles, and Rashica might come off, he might not, but time will tell.
The reality is as well with a striker, particularly at the age that Sargent is at, is if he can get 5-7 goals in the Premier League, then suddenly that elevates his price tag, doesn't it? And there will be teams inevitably that would be casting their eye on him. So that is kind of the risk and reward element that you talk about there, isn't it? And if it doesn't come off and Norwich stay in the Premier League, then realistically, that's not a massive problem, is it? And if he does come in and do well again, then the risk or the reward probably outweighs the risk for them. So it's an interesting one. I just want to pick up on this comment that Rambo Alpha, which is an excellent name on YouTube, has said. They've said with how much Bremen were on the back foot and how little of the ball he got, 5 goals makes sense for Norwich. Yeah, I kind of see a lot of this, and I think it's maybe an admission that Norwich aren't silly. They know they are going to have to play against the ball quite a lot. So that's going to be interesting. Just to round off this debate in terms of the two that we think are pretty close, or that we know are pretty close. Do you feel this would be it now for Norwich at the top end of the pitch? Obviously, I guess there's the elephant in the room, which maybe we'll come back to a little bit later on, with his blonde hair, very blonde-haired elephant, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But
where are you going with this? Where are you going with this, Connor?
Yeah, if all stayed as it was currently, and it was just these two that came in, do you think that would be Norwich City done at the top end of the pitch?
Yes, I think that would be them done at the top end of the pitch. And then the focus would shift to 1 centre mid and then ideally 2 defensive additions. But with the caveat that you've mentioned about the elephant, I think that would be them done. And, looking at it, you got Pookie, Ida, Rashica, Tzolis, Sargent, Dowell, Cantwell. No Buendia, we know, but you'd like to think there's enough quality and raw material there that Farke can fashion something which offers a far more of a threat than it did, certainly from about September, October onwards of the last time we were in the Premier League, when there was a lot of patient possession play and pleasing on the eye play, but they were toothless. When Pookie obviously got his injury at Leicester and thereafter looked a pale imitation, they were toothless, and that's why probably you do need to embellish the amount of options you've got, because there will be phases during the season where it's maybe not happening for Timu again for whatever reason, and Daniel needs this time around to be able to look around and not, with the greatest respect, have a Josip Dermic or a Dennis Shrubeni to call on, So let's hope these players are bringing in a serious upgrades. And of course, the only other thing I would say is outwards is I think we'd expect Jordan Hugill to be out of the equation as well. I think if that all goes to plan, then he won't be here beyond August. So you are losing one from your raw numbers in terms of the top end of the pitch, as well as doing whatever you're doing additions wise. But yeah, I think they get these two in. Allied to who they've already brought in, that's it at the top end of the pitch. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it does seem like Pookie, Sargent, and Ida look to be their kind of striking trio, doesn't it, going into the season, with Jordan Hugill's future, of course, unclear. But I think we've reported several times now, I think it's fairly common knowledge that both parties would be open to something if it cropped up. Just to round off this forward debate then, Adam Armstrong, I mean, we were both off on Wednesday, and obviously a tweet emerges that Norwich have made a major bid, and of course we have to spring into life and speak to lots of people and try and discover if there's any truth in that. Talk to me about Adam Armstrong and Norwich City's interest. I think we've said from the start that it was one that they were monitoring, and it's a significant but lots of things would have to fall in place for him to become a Norwich City player, namely the suitors around him and the price tag, both of which don't seem to have kind of gone away.
Well, it's the price tag, really. Yeah, I mean, I was told 6 weeks, maybe even longer now. Yes, the player they liked, but unlikely was the phrase then. And since then, it would appear from the outside looking at it, Blackburn haven't lessened their expectations in terms of the price. I've seen in the last few days 20 million, which, for a guy who's got 12 months left on his contract, and clearly a lot of that is probably driven by reported, so we have to take that with a pinch of salt, but there's a 40% sell on to his previous club, Newcastle. So if you're Blackburn, understandably, you were desperate to get that price properly driven, north of 15 million. And certainly when it goes beyond 12, then you can discount Norwich's interest, because they're not going to get involved in that level. Going back to what we just said earlier this afternoon in terms of the funds they've got available, it's a complete non-starter. I think you said, I think they probably got the wrong team in that report that dropped midweek, because subsequently Palace, have they been touted as being in advanced discussions? Southampton, I've seen again, might have another nibble because they were linked previously, post Ings' departure. No, absolutely zero in Norwich and Adam Armstrong. That ship sailed and quite a long time ago. So, yeah. We'll see if that's a good call or not. I'll be interested to see where he does end up, actually, and more so then if he is in the Premier League, how good he can be, because there's no doubt at Championship level last 2 seasons in a pretty average Blackburn side who didn't really threaten the top 6 in the last 2 seasons. He was too good for the Championship. So yeah, it's an interesting one to see how he gets on in the Premier League if and when we expect he makes his move, but it won't be to Norwich.
No, absolutely not. And it seems like at present there's only been one bid, and that was from Southampton earlier in the window for around 8 million rather. There we go, got it out eventually, which is a significant difference between the 20 that Blackburn want currently. So that's a big gap to bridge, particularly if you're Norwich City. And talk of Adam Ida in the deal as well, absolute non-starter. So yeah, that's not one that I think people need to monitor of any real interest. I think if you're Blackburn, and I tweeted this at the time, it was the night that Danny Ings had joined Aston Villa, hadn't it? And obviously Southampton have been linked to Adam Armstrong fairly heavily, and now they've got £30 million in their back pocket. If you're Blackburn, it's probably in your interest to maybe try and drive up that interest, given we're 3 weeks away from deadline day, and there doesn't really seem to have been any movement up to this point. And if, as we've said, Palace have come forward and are now in advanced discussions, and you have to say from their perspective it has worked, but I don't think it's anything beyond that. Obviously, the news of Sargent's arrival, if it does happen, clearly would kind of cut across that interest, wouldn't it? So that would end that, I would imagine. That's kind of it in terms of strikers. What I will do is just scroll up because we had a question from Zach, which is the first question we got, which I'll answer. And he has said, with Tzolis and Sargent just around the corner, I wonder who the other 2 and 3 signings will be. People on Twitter seem to want Harrison Reed back in midfield, and we still need a centre-back, don't you think? Pad, what do you think in terms of... I've seen a few whispers of Harrison Reed, not reported anywhere, but certainly his name being mentioned on Twitter is maybe desirable. Fulham obviously back in the Championship, wealthy owners, doesn't really look like they've got perhaps the need to sell that others in the Championship have at the moment. Say Bournemouth, for example, it would be pretty hefty, wouldn't it, to see Harrison Reed come back? And obviously in terms of the centre-back debate as well, it does... Now, well, obviously it's still on their list, but it does seem to kind of be slipping down the priority list. I think that's probably fair to say.
All day long, I'd say it's of the ranked positions that they need now. It's probably the lowest priority inside the club, and that's mainly, I guess, because they're confident in Omobama Daly stepping up and not stepping up to be, a frontline starter from the outset. But if you're bringing in, we hope, 19-year-old sort of attacking wide players and 21-year-old strikers, then it's not a huge leap of faith to have an 18, 19-year-old centre-back at the other end of the pitch. And certainly everything anybody who's watched him in pre-season, again, I thought midweek, yes, okay, the opposition, take that into account, but very confident, I thought, with and without the ball. Looks to have physically grown as well, and he was a big lad before he went away over the summer, but now he's, he looks, ready for the physical athletic aspect of it, which we know was an important factor in terms of what Norwich were trying to do in the market this window. So, no, not hearing anything in the last sort of week or so about centre-backs, and because obviously that kind of dominated with Aya and Adarabioyo and Borneo. That seemed to be the first part of the transfer window, was an obsession with centre-backs in Norwich. But I think it's safe to say that that's firmly on the back burner at the minute. And Harrison Reed, definitely not a name they're looking at, but you can understand why the links have come about, given that they want to sort of do a centre mid. And to be fair, he didn't see too much of him at centre mid when he was here before. He looked better as a right back. I remember him elbowing Ivo Pinto out and not looking that uncomfortable at right back. So whether he could do a job still at right back, but I think since then he has gravitated back towards his more natural position and was, by all accounts, very key to Fulham getting up the first time, wasn't he? I think didn't work for them in the Premier League, and maybe I don't know the situation at Fulham. New coach gone in. Whether they need to move players on in terms of revenue generation to sort of refresh the squad, but can understand why his name has appeared, but not one Norwich are looking at. So I don't think we need to worry about Harrison Reed reunion. Obviously, the one they'd like to do is Ollie Skip, but in the last day or two, pertinent because they're playing them tomorrow. I see Newcastle getting linked with Ollie Skip, and again, the key to that particular scenario is what Nuno's plans are for him. If Nuno thinks he's close enough to Tottenham's first 11, match day 18, then it's academic because he'll be staying at Tottenham. But as we get to the closing days of the window, I've seen somebody on social actually earlier today saying, hypothetically, if the Kane sort of saga ends up with him going to Man City and Tottenham are banking 100, 150 million, Nuno's going to want to spend a fair chunk of that. If they bring in central midfielders, does that then push Skip further down the pecking order and then facilitate a potential loan, move? Who knows? We're in hypotheticals at the minute. But if that is to be the case, and I'm not sure it is, then clearly if clubs like Newcastle are getting linked with him, there'll be one or two others in the Premier League because, of course, what he did so brilliantly for Norwich last season, that won't have gone unnoticed, albeit at the Championship level. Norwich would not be the only show in town. I think that's safe to say if there was a scenario back end of the window where Ollie Skip is made available on loan. So I think, we spoke to one or two, didn't we, people at the club 2-3 weeks ago, and they pretty much had closed the door on it happening. So, but while they've still got this one domestic loan still to use, obviously Billy Gilmore came in from Chelsea. There's a lot of talk about the boy Brandon Williams at Manchester United, a player they do like. There have been talks. not sure they're quite on the same page in terms of the structure of a deal that could make that happen. But while they haven't used up that other domestic loan, then of course, there's always going to be a very small percentage chance that it could be used on Ollie Skip. But I think right here, right now, it's looking pretty unlikely. But if it's not Ollie Skip, and it won't be Harrison Reed, it will be somebody else, because they are going to bring in a midfielder, and we know, Billings, the one they've been endlessly touted with, and the last sort of 7 days or so, I don't think that's moved on. I mean, there was some reports about they've opened talks, but let me assure you, they've been in talks with Bournemouth for quite some time over that, man. And I think the sticking point is now, as it was at the start of summer, that Bournemouth have a valuation on that guy. Norwich don't share that valuation, and unless there's some, common ground and maybe some give on the Bournemouth side, it's hard to see how that deal progresses, or that prospective deal progresses. Daniel touched on it again midweek when I asked him. There's a little bit of concern amongst some Norwich fans about, Lys Malou was the last deal they did. That was mid-July, about the actual, pace of the activity. And Daniel said, being no doubt, with plenty of work is going on behind the scenes, but, we're not going to, push the boat out. And he used like another $1 million or two for players because we simply don't have that money to deal with. So, that tells me, reading between the lines, that Bournemouth and Norwich are fairly wide apart in their respective valuations of billing, because nothing has moved on that for quite a number of weeks now.
No, exactly spot on with that. What I was just going to follow up with there, while you were speaking about Ollie Skip, and you did reference Brandon Williams, but how does that kind of play out for Norwich throughout this window? If they do get a sniff that they can get Ollie Skip back, but equally there's these talks in the background for Brandon Williams, how does that play out in terms of utilising that last domestic loan spot?
Well, I mean, Stuart Webber is the only man who can really answer that definitively. But if there is a chance to get Ollie Skip back, then that's the priority, I think. I think Stuart said if they had to wait for the last minute of the last hour of the last day of the window, but they could get Ollie Skip, they would do it. So if they get any encouragement whatsoever, then I think I don't think Brandon Williams happens, and they'd have to look at it in terms of alternative avenues to bring in another left back. But again, that can change again, because I think they've started to look more closely at that area of the pitch, maybe because of the ongoing concerns still around Sam Byram and his fitness. He needed a full pre-season really to push himself forward after an horrendous length on the sidelines with those hamstring issues. He's had a setback, but if he's still able to sort of come back now in the next sort of week or two, then going into the season, if they're able to do an Ollie Skip, then maybe that lessens the necessity to do something left back wise. But no, I still think, as I say, repeating myself, but I still think Ollie Skip's probably a ship that has sailed. And but the Brandon Williams one is an interesting one, because fundamentally, if Max is still here and Dimitris is on the other side, Manchester United presumably want that guy to go and play football, because there's no point in swapping, kicking his heels at United for doing likewise at another Premier League club. But it's very hard to see a way past those two to Norwich's first 11. So that, to me, is the more intriguing one, more so than can they put a financial deal in place, because they've managed to do that with Gilmour and Chelsea. Quite an astute bit of business in terms of the fee they end up paying will be reduced if he plays a certain amount of games. So I think the financials around a deal for Brandon Williams wouldn't be an onerous hurdle to clear. It's more, I think, the guarantees of what level of football or exposure that he could get. Because if you're Ollie Solskjaer, you want him to go out to play games. It's not to bring in a loan fee for Manchester United. So, but it is interesting that he's one they have followed quite a long period of summer, and there have been discussions. So they obviously feel potentially he's one who could come in and add to the group.
We'll speak about Todd Cantwell in just a moment. We'll take a few comments, though. This from Richard on YouTube. He says, apart from Malou, I can't see how the physicality of the squad is better. Take Tetty out and Stiepermann, and it is worse. Pad, what do you make of that point? Because when we talk about physicality, and we made this point a few times, it's not just pure size and maybe like muscle, maybe that people would associate with. It's also about how sort of consistent does this person sprint? How long can they sprint? Those kind of really nuanced kind of athletic qualities. Not necessarily, when we mention physicality, we're not talking about a 6'3" midfielder who can head it further. They can kick it. That's a point I think is important to stress.
That is it in a nutshell. Yeah, it's like those, and now the amounts of data that are available for sports science departments are ridiculous. Sprints over a certain amount of time and over a certain ground in a game or parts of a game, and forays into the final third and so on and so forth. So many metrics. But ultimately, it boils down to the athletic ability and maybe that endurance as well to last the pace, rather than, as you rightly say, a team of Burnley type giants. So that's not what they mean when they're talking about more physicality or more athleticism is probably a better phrase, to be honest, in terms of how Stuart is looking at it than pure sort of physical power. It's more about the athletic ability to deal with these teams. But of course, within that, you do need a fair proportion of lads who are able to mix it, certainly on set pieces and what have you. But you go back to that back end the last 2 seasons ago when they got absolutely bullied by Mikel Antonio, who is a rather well-built chap, but I mean he's not Jan Koller, is he? So I think it's more that's one for your older viewers, but it's not. It's more athleticism than sheer sort of how tall is this guy, how much does he weigh, sort of thing.
Absolutely. Right, let's answer this question, which I can get it up, which is from Coolpad on YouTube, who has just asked, is Todd staying? Pad, I'll throw that over to you because there's quite a few. Well, as we kind of reported, I think since the Grealish to Man City stuff really picked up pace, it does seem now relatively, we'll see what happens, but it does look like Aston Villa may step up their interest in Todd Cantwell. He's clearly someone that is well liked behind the scenes.
Yeah, no, he's definitely 100%. He has his admirers inside Villa Park. That is guaranteed. And I think the fear from the Norwich end was that once Grealish had gone through, that they would be straight on the phone. But that hasn't materialised, as far as I'm aware. That there hasn't been any discussions. That there was probably off the back of the Buendia talks that there may have been a discussion, but we're going earlier in the summer. So we can't answer that definitively because if Villa do pick up the phone to Stuart Webber again, he's got a great relationship with Christian Purslow, who did that video that Villa put out last night. Just explaining their reasoning and the logic behind the whole Grealish deal, and obviously within that 5 minutes of video seemed to infer that they'd already got the players in to replace Grealish. But I know some people have then took that to mean, well, that's Todd staying because they've already got the Cantwell the Grealish replacements. But I wouldn't read it that way. But I think ultimately, if you're a Villa fan now and they've banked 100 million fee, but a large chunk of that will come up front, are you telling me they'd be happy to see no more additions at Villa Park? They wouldn't. They'd be up in arms. So Villa will be active between now and the end of the window, guaranteed. And the way I look at it is, say you go and get a Cantwell now, he comes in having already stated you've got your Grealish replacements, then you're not putting any of that expectation on young shoulders. Here you go, Villa fans, this is the Grealish replacement, because that would be a huge burden given what a totemic figure he's been at Villa Park to replace that guy. So that's quite an astute way they've gone about it, I think. So we're in hypotheticals as we are with a lot of these things, but right here, right now, no, there's been nothing off the back of Grealish going in terms of Norwich are now having decisions to make about Cantwell in terms of Villa. But would I be surprised if Villa renew their interest? No, absolutely not. And then it comes down to, as Stuart has been very clear about, figures that have to be hit for Norwich to consider selling that guy as we get ever later into the window, as we get into the start of the season. The disruption that would cause for Norwich, because right here, right now, they're planning for Cantwell to be quite a key figure. And we've seen that in pre-season. Saw it again midweek and again with the caveat of Gillingham, but how influential he was, definitely stepping into those large Buendia-shaped shoes in terms of Norwich's creative pivot, essentially. And certainly Daniel would view him in that role moving forward. There's no doubt about it. He showed in glimpses in the Premier League 2 seasons ago, and he's a far better player now, far better player. So you would expect he could be a big player for Norwich in the Premier League. And in that context, this late in the window, if it's Villa or whoever, they're going to have to pay top dollar to take Todd Cantwell. So, we simply can't say, in answer to that question, we can't say here on the August the 6th, when the window closes on August the 31st, that Todd Cantwell is staying, because, we don't know what scenarios are going to play out from here. But certainly the expectation, if you're Daniel Farker, is that Todd Cantwell will be here from Liverpool and beyond. And I guess ultimately it's up to other clubs whether that's Villa or whoever, to actually test Norwich's resolve to hold on to the guy.
Absolutely, and of course Stuart Webber will be aware, because Christian Purslow told everyone, didn't he, on the video last night, that they've just bagged £100 million. So
Yeah.
that will be a few million added to Cantwell's price tag should Aston Villa pick up the phone, and that will be the same as well, I would imagine, for anyone now that Aston Villa pursue, because every club will be aware that they have that resource and they have that money. And it seems that, well, certainly the reports that I've seen this morning, that they are planning to spend that money they got for Jack Grealish as well to improve the side. So I wouldn't particularly read too much, as you said there, into those Purslow quotes. But it will be interesting to see what happens with Todd over the next few weeks. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah, let's look ahead a little bit to Newcastle. Cameron asks a good question here. He says, one of the players back that had to self-isolate due to COVID, will we see them at Newcastle? I noticed Timu Puki's wife put on an Instagram story of him back in a Norwich training kit, and they'd obviously flown over from Finland to see him. So that would suggest possibly that his self-isolation is finished, which would be positive. As opposed to the other players, Pad, do you think we'll see some of them tomorrow? Do you think we'll see all of them tomorrow? How do you kind of think that this will play out?
Yeah, no, Pookie, I've had it more or less confirmed that he will be involved at Newcastle tomorrow. But the other 6, no, I've not had the same sort of indication, which would lead you to think, just in terms of the timescale of these matters. I think Daniel, off the top of my head, did indicate that some of those 7 would be available for this weekend, but he didn't put a number on it. So time will tell. But the most important factor in this was that Daniel had said for quite a number of days prior to the Gillingham game, they'd had no more positive tests results, testing religiously, obviously, as you can expect. So they hope that they're through this phase of players having to isolate, and so don't think we'll see all 7. I think that's safe to assume tomorrow, but how many we probably are not going to find out until the team news drops around about 1 o'clock. But what my expectation is that Timo will be there, and he definitely needs a game or two, because as Daniel mapped out Wednesday night, he came back late from the Euros, had that extra time off, trained for 3 or 4 days, scored after about 14 minutes of that behind closed doors game against Huddersfield, wasn't it? And then obviously then had to go into self-isolation. So, his pre-season has been fairly negligible. So, he definitely needs some minutes, you would hope, at St. James's tomorrow, because, irrespective of what happens with signings in the next few days, come Saturday week, 5:30 Carrow Road, that man will be leading the line against Liverpool.
Absolutely. One for you, Paddy. Question here from the Box Protector on YouTube. It says, Paddy, always likes hearing your percentages. Window closes. What percentage do you put it that Max and Todd are Norwich players? I don't know if you want to split that individually or if you want to do it as a package. It's up to you, really.
Problem is, this will be then clipped out now, and I'll be made to. Well, already I'm a fool, but I'll be made to look like an even bigger fool. So, but I'll go with it. To be fair, that question, I think we were asked that about Aaron's at the start of summer, and I more or less said, no, he's gone, definitely gone. So it just shows you how things can change.
But to be fair, he might have been if Ancelotti didn't take the Real Madrid job. So there's that element as well. You don't know how situations are going to evolve.
Thanks for that, mate. I'll give you the fiver afterwards. Yeah, no, but that is true. No, I mean, basically, I think he would have been an Everton player because Ancelotti was very keen on him by all accounts. Benitez, less so in terms of his fullbacks and the type of fullback he wants. But and I think I saw this morning, because we know that Atletico do have him on a bit of a watch list, but dependent on Kieran Trippier going. And there was reports in the national media today that Atletico is sticking pretty resolutely to a 30 million valuation on Trippier. So, United were the principal ones linked with him. If, again, it's the moving parts of the jigsaw. If United don't test Atletico's resolve and take Trippier, then that door closes. Tottenham was the only other club I'd seen with any sort of what you'd class maybe a bit more than speculation and rumour in gossip columns. And as we said earlier, if they're flush with 150 million from Harry Kane's departure, that might alter what they do in the window between now and the end. So I think I'm going to be quite bullish. I think Aaron's 80% stays between now and the end of the window. And Todd, we need to get Christian Purslow on here and give us a bit of insight. But Villa do like him, no doubt about it. Now, they are getting heavily linked with Ward-Prowse, aren't they, at Southampton? Now, whether they decided he's the one they want in that type of attacking midfield, although he's more of a sitter, isn't he, Ward-Prowse, but very good set pieces, very good assist maker. But if they more tilting towards a Ward-Prowse and a Cantwell, then as far as I'm aware, there's been no other real clubs linked with Todd this window. So we'll say maybe 65 that Cantwell stays here, but a little bit less than max because of the Villa and the Grealish situation, really. But I mean, who cares what I think? I mean, it's more what Daniel thinks, and we've got some quotes actually. We'll probably pump out tomorrow morning, I think, from Daniel in the last few days, where he is very optimistic that both of those lads will still be here beyond August, with the inevitable caveat that a lot can happen in, where are we, 6th of August, 24, 25 days. That's an enormous amount of time, isn't it? And as Stuart has been telling us, he thinks paranoia will kick in even more. Panic will set in between now and the end of the window. There'll be a lot of thrashing about and a lot of disturbance in the market. So it just pays to basically caveat anything we say right here, right now with who knows what's around the corner. But Daniel is confident, and that'll do for me.
Absolutely. I liked how you built up the tension to the Cantwell percentage. That was good in terms of a content perspective. Michael has said, do we have a sell-on clause if Madison moves to Arsenal? Could be a handy extra quid or so. Pat, I know that you wrote something on this a while back, didn't you? So
yes,
tell us what that is.
15% is what I'm led to believe on the profit, which they paid. Was it 21? I think off the top of my head, and the attendant clauses haven't kicked in, i.e. Champions League. Well, tell a lie. I think Norwich did get a little bit of payment when Leicester got to the Europa group stages 2 seasons ago, but missed out on the Champions League. That's another clause. Hasn't played for England or started for England in a competitive game. That's another clause. So, I'm seeing 60 million. But the only caveat, I've not checked with Norwich, but it seems to be a bit of a cash plus player deal is what Arsenal are trying to tempt Leicester with. How that would impact on, would Norwich only get the 15% on the cash element of that, or would you have to take in the value of the players, the make-weight players? That's something we'll have to go back and check if it comes to pass. But yeah, 15 on any profit. So 15% on 40 million, if you take 21 off 60, would be a very nice little top up to the kitty. Might even, if that happened early enough in the window, might allow Norwich to go and do another bit of business, mightn't it?
Yeah, cash plus player deals are very difficult to do, aren't they? Notoriously slow and quite sort of laborious to process. So that again, you talk about the market being slow. The Madison one could be one that rumbles on. I'm not quite sure where Arsenal have suddenly found this influx of cash, to be honest, but we shall see, I suppose. Interesting one in terms of Sam Byram. We've had a couple of questions about him. Liam says, can you see us cutting ties with Byram if he can't get back? There was a lot of optimism, wasn't there, earlier in the summer about him and his recovery. He had that little setback after King's Lynn, doesn't it? It seems to maybe have diminished a little bit. I think that's probably fair to say. I guess for Sam now, it's about getting fit, isn't it? And maybe not worrying too much about anything beyond that at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key to everything, really. His body has to be in a position where it could handle the load of first team football, and I say that rather than Premier League football, because if we only get to that point well into the start of the season, then Norwich have probably moved on. We're talking about how they probably do need or would like to do something fullback wise. If Max is still here, Demetrius is still here, the wheel may have turned, and Sam might have missed his opportunity really to be involved in it. And if he's not going to be part of Norwich's Premier League season, then to take that question, you could conceivably see if he's in a physical state to play football, that maybe he goes out and gets a bit of loan football, maybe January onwards, maybe the end of next season. But it's a crying shame for the lad because, as we all know, Stuart Webber was honest enough to admit that the recruitment this stage 2 seasons ago was poor beyond belief, apart from one shining light, and that was Sam Byram, who, let's be honest, was able to oust Jamal Lewis playing left back as well, which I don't think he was necessarily recruited for. But that versatility, he was, for me, heading towards maybe Norwich's player of the season. Well, maybe him or Tim Krul, to be fair, if he'd have played for the remaining 3 or 4 months of that season. But it's a cruel business, and you're on the upward curve and then you're on the downward slope, and ultimately, we've seen it to a slightly lesser degree already this summer with Louis Thompson, who, they've cut their ties there. His Norwich career was really completely blighted by injury after injury, low moves, but then he got injured on low moves, and they've reached the point with him where shake hands, both go their separate ways, and conceivably, there's a bit more mileage left in this story, I think, but you could conceivably see the same scenario with Sam Byram down the track.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's wrap this up then. So any last questions, get them in, last orders. We will end with this one, if not, which is all about Kieran Scott to Middlesbrough. This is one that has kind of developed throughout the week. He is going to Middlesbrough. Neil Warnock has essentially confirmed that with some quotes that we had on our website yesterday. I think he's told them to talk sport. Give us a little bit more detail about this, Pad, because you covered this as it sort of broke to an extent. Talk to us about Kieran Scott and his move to Middlesbrough, because it's something that's been in the offing for a little while. I think it was rumoured right at the start of the summer, but it's hard to remember how yesterday went, let alone
June,
2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it was a little while ago. It seems to have kicked on since then, and he's not played as significant a role in Norwich City's business this summer.
Yeah, well, that's the indication from inside the club that I'm hypothesising to a degree, but maybe after those initial reports surfaced, I'm sure there would have been some conversations between him and Stuart Webber. And thereafter, it would appear that he's taken a little bit of a back seat. He hasn't been, bearing in mind obviously that a lot of the majority of the targets that they've gone for in this window, that work has been on. I mean, we're talking about Tzolis earlier. They've been tracking him for 12 months, so it isn't that they suddenly got to middle of May and then got a blank sheet of paper and started to put down the names they wanted to bring in this summer. So I think it was maybe more with a view to future windows in terms of Kieran taking a step back and what might be happening in January and next summer and so on, and because that's obviously the length of time that they work ahead. And yes, and ultimately, we haven't heard from the man himself, but he did tell us on the club's official podcast at the end of last season that the sporting director role was a position he wanted to progress his career into, and how Stuart had been a mentor for him and a sounding board. And without getting into the whole sort of what does this mean for Stuart and his contract situation, what it probably means is that Kieran Scott has had an opportunity to go into that sporting director role maybe a bit sooner than he would have got at Norwich, and he's obviously heard what he wanted to hear in terms of the support he's going to get at Middlesbrough to go and do that job. And our understanding is that Neil Warnock's understanding is at the end of this window, ideally, I think there'll be a joint announcement and that will go through. But essentially, that's just formalising kind of the situation as it is now and has been for a number of weeks. And more interestingly, maybe in terms of what this means for Norwich, because it comes off the back of they obviously lost another guy, Chris Jones, was it, who went to Palace a bit earlier in the window. He was their lead European and domestic scout. Clearly, if you're looking at it from the outside and seeing these kind of key recruitment people leaving, what does that say? I think Norwich are fairly relaxed about the situation. They're recruiting at present for, I'd have to go and look at the job spec, but it was kind of the head of technical scouting, wasn't it? Yeah. And I think that might be an indication that there's going to be a few internal appointments and people maybe moving up from levels that they're doing now. And that outward advertisement is to come into maybe a position of somebody who's doing a similar role at the minute who might be stepping up. There's been a bit of talk around maybe, Neil Adams, might have an input into this moving forward. But ultimately, Norwich are pretty relaxed about it. They're putting in increasing amounts. We talked about data and metrics in terms of what they're looking for with players, and that is at the heart now of Norwich and what they're looking to do recruitment-wise, and maybe more of a pivot towards the analysis rather than the older style scouts who go out and watch masses of games and speak to people and really are driven by what they see rather than maybe what the metrics tell them about, the potential of a player to be a good fit for that football club. So not saying that wasn't Kieran Scott necessarily, but I think he was maybe more of the older style scout. But, it clearly isn't, given that, he had such an input into some of those great signings that they did do. But in an ideal world, you probably want him staying. But I don't get any sense that there's there's a huge hole there that Norwich are worried about how they feel moving forward. I think the good thing with this ultimately is that this has been in the offing for months, certainly weeks, and Norwich are able to, put plans in place and have done. And I think once the appointment itself is confirmed and his exit is confirmed, I think you'll pretty quickly after that, you'll probably see a little bit more clarity to what Norwich are going to do in terms of the recruitment. But certainly, they'll shake his hand, wish him all the best, and we'll see how he gets on at Middlesbrough. But anybody who's looking at it from the outside and thinking, my God, this is a massive hole now punched in Norwich's recruitment strategy, that is far from that, I think. And ultimately, Stuart Webber is the one who drives that department particularly, and everything that has happened so far will have been signed off by Stuart Webber in terms of the players that they brought into this point since 2017. So you have to bear that in mind, that the main man in terms of recruitment is still very much at the helm.
Absolutely. Right. We'll leave it there, I think, Pat, because we're going to have to hit the road fairly soon and head up to Newcastle. Yeah. So thank you all very much for watching. Of course, Pinkin.com, the place to go for all the latest transfer news, and we'll be at St James's Park tomorrow, as I mentioned at the top of the show. So all of, updates, reaction, analysis, all of that there as well. Thank you all very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and we'll see you again very, very soon.